Hi everybody, welcome to my top 10 reads of 2024. I'm going to go ahead and link any relevant reviews and discussion videos in the description below for in-depth thoughts, but this is going to be a brief overview of the books that most emotionally impacted me this last year. And I'm not going to give any honorable mentions, but I will go ahead and say really quickly that if I could list a short story, which I won't for this list, but if I could list a short story, it would be The Death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy. That was possibly the most impactful story I read this last year, so I just want to mention that at the forefront. But this list will include novels, so let's go ahead and get started. Now, when I was making this list, I found I had an easy time coming up with numbers 1 through 9, but my number 10 spot was a bit more difficult. I was torn between at least 4 different books for number 10, but I finally came to the conclusion that at my number 10 spot, it has to be
Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier.
Rebecca follows a nameless protagonist in first-person narration. She ends up married to the widower of the Manderley estate, but all the while, as she's trying to fit into her new role, she finds herself haunted by the memory of Rebecca, who was the wife, the deceased wife of our widower. So our nameless protagonist finds herself struggling to fit into this role. She finds herself being swallowed whole in this huge estate with its pond side and its antagonistic flowers that surround it. I find this book the perfect Gothic novel as it deals with death and memory. It has that subtle psychological terror that carries you through the story. It has the estate that is a hallmark of Gothic literature, and the nature descriptions were also important and symbolic throughout the story. This is the perfect cozy classic Gothic read that you want to read by the fireside, curled up under a blanket on a stormy day. My number 9 favorite book of 2024, Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is book 1 in the Hyperion Cantos. It is largely inspired in structure by the Canterbury Tales by Chaucer, but this is a framed narrative in which we have several characters who are on a pilgrimage on the planet Hyperion seeking the Shrike creature. And we go into the backstories of each character and why they ended up where they ended up. They each have very distinct storylines. Some are very emotional and tragic. And the story has these very personal journeys of these characters at the same time as it has these macro things happening in the world, such as the rise in AI, intergalactic war. We have people colonizing other planets, and then the question of what religion means when humans are no longer bound to Earth. There were some storylines that I appreciated more than other storylines, but I still appreciated what this book did in micro and macro ways, and I can understand why it's so monumental in the science fiction genre. My number 8 favorite book of 2024 is Grand Conspiracy by Janny Wirtz. This is book number 6 in the Wars of Light and Shadow series, and this book lives up to its name. It's very difficult to talk about any book in this series past book 1 without giving away spoilers, but we are following the journey of 2 half-brothers, one with the gift of light, one with the gift of shadow, and this particular book deals quite a bit with conspiratorial scheming. It deals with manipulation, consent, and it also introduces a couple of really interesting characters that I enjoyed in this particular book. But what I really loved about this book was the metaphysical environmental magic that occurs in one particular scene, actually a couple of different scenes. There are some incredible scenes that have to do with nature, magic, metaphysics. And then also, I loved the romantic subplots in this book. I've been saying, especially since this book, that if Janny Wirtz ever wrote a romantasy, I would sign up so quickly. I would read that book so quickly. I'm not a huge romantasy type of reader, but I loved the romantic subplots. I love the way that Janny Wirtz understands romantic love in a way that's not superficial, it's not contrived, it feels earned, it feels deep, and it's beautiful. So this is something I appreciate about the series. I love the female characters in this series a lot. I've talked about that before, but Wars of Light and Shadow does have some of the best nature descriptions and magic that I've come across in fantasy. My number 7 favorite book of 2024 is Tigana by Guy Gavriel Kay. This is not my favorite Guy Gavriel Kay book. I did have some criticisms, which I talk about in my review, but I have to say that the emotional impact of the themes of Tigana still stay with me. So this is a book that deals with a province that has been magically erased by a tyrant, and the people who come from that province They are seeking to restore their land, to restore their background, their culture, their society, their architecture, everything about their lives has been lost. So it deals with the role of memory and its impact culturally, but it also deals with the role of loss. It deals with renewal as well. What takes the place of that loss? What are the prospects that come about whenever something is taken away? What kind of connections can be rebuilt or formed in its place? And then it also deals with tyranny, as we have two tyrants in this peninsula, one of which who erased Tigana, but the people who want to bring down this tyrant and restore the magic have to worry about another tyrant that they might empower on this mission. So I found that whole entire exploration of power, of memory, of renewal, and of connection, of loss so powerfully woven throughout character journeys and the plot of this story. In addition to that, we also have interesting folklore magic, including Rusalkas. There are two features in Kay's writing that have spoken to me in every book I've read by him so far. One of them, Josh from Red Fairy Books recently mentioned, and that is the role of gravitas in his stories, how he can write stories that feel important. And of course, this particular book does take some inspiration from Italian history, but I think the way that that importance or that gravitas comes about in his stories is through the character speeches. You have more than one incredible character on a page at a time, and the way that they talk about what's important to them, what's meaningful to them, it makes you feel ennobled as a reader. I think the best other example I can come up with is Lord of the Rings. When you hear something that Gandalf says or Aragorn says, or certain characters say that feel elevated in some way, I think Kay has a gift for that noble speech. And the other thing that I think that Kay does so well in his stories is serendipity. The way that characters can cross paths at the perfect time in their lives in a way that feels serendipitous, in a way that feels like it could have been fate, but it could have been by accident. And either way, it's important, it's meaningful, and they make the most out of that in their quest to find what's important for them in their journeys. These two features of Kay's writing, in addition to the themes of the story, are the reason that this book takes my number 7 spot. My number 6 favorite read of 2024 is The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is the first book I finished in 2024, and it has stayed with me all year long. I think it is one of the most well-crafted, thought-provoking science fiction books I've ever read. It deals with dual societies. We have a moon planet and a mother planet. On the moon planet, it is a utopian, dystopian, anarchist society, and then the mother planet is very analogous to Earth. It's a capitalistic society with greed and warring nations. And there is a physicist from the moon planet who comes to the Earth like planet. The journey of this character is all the more compelling because of the way that Le Guin structured the book. We get alternate chapters of him on his home planet, on the moon planet, in the past timeline, alternating with chapters in the present timeline on the planet he has arrived on, the mother planet. And you slowly build to understand him as a character, where he's come from, how it's made him who he is, and the challenges that he faces as he's journeyed to this mother planet. And he has to face questions regarding transparency and ownership of ideas and privacy. There's also the symbolism of the wall that's brought forth in the first paragraph of the book and continues to be an important symbol throughout the narrative. This is a book that was far more emotional than I was expecting. I knew I would enjoy this book. I was pretty certain I would. I was sure, though, that this book would be more intellectual, live more in my head than my heart. And so I was surprised how emotionally invested I got towards the end and how much I'm still thinking about this book all this time later. My number 5 choice, The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell. This is one of the most rich character studies of a book I have ever read. We are following a 15-year-old English girl named Holly Sykes in the 1980s. She makes a choice that will forever change the course of her life and the lives of several characters after her. So we start out again in the 80s with her storyline, go to the next decade with the next character, and then the next decade with a totally different character. Each of the characters is distinct. Each of the characters has a very rich personality, various character traits about them that are informed by the society in which they live, their socioeconomic class, but they also feel like real people. There wasn't a single storyline in this book that I didn't emotionally invest in. I think that David Mitchell has an understanding of human nature at the deepest level. This is the only book I've read in 2024 that managed to both make me laugh out loud and cry. There was a point where I literally had to put the book down because the tears started welling up in my eyes at a certain point. So I think this is one of the best books I've read in 2024. The only thing I'll say is that the mind-bending magic, as this is a fantasy story, was all brought to a head. There were several reveals that happened towards the end of the book that I didn't quite find satisfying, but even that couldn't steal from all of the emotional moments that I experienced leading up to it. So I would say this is the book for the character-driven reader. If you can get behind character work over plot, you need to pick up The Bone Clocks. Lonesome Dove by McMurdy is number 4 on my list. This follows a ragtag group of men and a woman named Lorena who live in a southern Texas town called Lonesome Dove. They decide to take the journey up to Montana, herding a bunch of cattle. And this journey turns out to be far more treacherous with far more emotional consequences than anyone fathoms. This is a story that takes a scrutinizing look at masculinity and the romanticized notion of a Western adventure. Additionally, this story explores friendship and loyalty and love and loneliness. And it also has settings that are rich, alluring, and hostile. It has heart-pounding and brutal action scenes. So this story was incredibly gripping and immersive, and the characters and dialogue will stay with me forever, especially the character of Gus. I was a little bit mixed about the ending of the book, but the overall experience of this book did leave me with a book hangover. Number 3 on my list, Perdido Street Station by China Miéville. We follow a scholarly scientist named Isaac who is in a relationship with an insectile artist woman named Lynn, and both are commissioned for these projects that turn out to be a bit shady. They both turn out to have some conspiratorial ties with the government and the mafia, and this is all taking place in this steampunk-like urban setting, the city called New Crobazone. New Crobazone, with its dilapidated buildings, with its murky sewers, with its mucus cemented buildings. There's also so much strangeness in the story, a bit of cosmic horror tied in, a lot of rich, weird phenomenon that happens. Miéville's prose is sweeping. It encompasses every detail of the city landscape and setting and smell of New Crobazone. And I would say that if you're a fan of Scott Lynch's writing, for the over-the-top plots that brilliantly comes together in a satisfying conclusion, then I would think you might enjoy this. I also think if you like Erickson's touch for the strange and weird, that this also might appeal to you as well. I'm not the most plot-driven reader, and I didn't find the plot hard to follow, but I found that the plot was brilliant. It was brilliant in incorporating its themes, in incorporating excellent character moments. Characters deal with moral decision making that I do not envy. And so this was such a winner for me. It was such a pleasant surprise. I'm surprised it's not talked about more, and it certainly deserves the number 3 spot on my list. My number 2 favorite book, Clara and the Sun by Ishiguro. This book is told in first-person narration from an AI character, an artificial friend named Clara. Artificial friends in this story are created to cure teenagers from loneliness. So the book deals with loneliness, friendship, human connection, the human heart, and it does so with expert subtlety. One thing that I appreciate about this book is the way that the tone of the book, it manages to feel a bit light and upbeat at times, and yet still have powerful moments of melancholy. I would also say that this book is what I would consider a minimalist approach to world building. And usually I love lush, rich descriptions of setting, but I think that the power of this book is the way that we're given just enough information about what's going on to keep you intrigued, to keep you in a state of wonder and curiosity. And it was Ishiguro's approach to that made this such a special read. Another reason this was so special was because of the wonderful buddy read I had with Murphy and Jimmy. The different angles that we saw in the story, the way that we connected and talked about this book, it just added to my sense of wonder. That sense of wonder is the reason why Clara and the Sun stands out for me as one of the most special books I read in 2024. My number 1 favorite book of 2024, The White Luck Warrior by R. Scott Baker. This is book number 5 in the Second Apocalypse series, also book 2 in the Aspect Emperor series. So, this might come as a surprise to some readers why I'm not picking the last book in this series, the finale, but I have to say The White Luck Warrior is the one that stands out the most for me. Before I get into why, I'll go ahead and say that this book is hard to talk about spoiler free, obviously, especially because I feel like any characters I talk about will be spoilers for the original trilogy. But I'll try to say it this way. We follow a character who is leading this huge conquest. He is traveling with armies of men up north in the land. And then we have a female character who is at home in a palace. She's trying to lead from a seat of power, but also trying to deal with her very strange family members that she doesn't know she can trust. We also have another set of characters who are on this other journey trying to find out the truth about the conquest, and they're in this murky forest and they're dealing with some really strange magic, maybe a possible substance abuse addiction. And so, as I've said before about this book, it deals with the most unhinged motley crew I've ever followed in fantasy. It has a character that reminds me of Buffalo Bill and Hannibal Lecter from Silence of the Lambs. It has some of the most incredible female character arcs I've ever read. As I've mentioned before as well, this book deals with that push and pull between free will, the idea that we don't have any free will, that we're just puppets and there is no free will, and this idea that certainty doesn't exist. So I think the push and pull between those two ideas is what makes this series so compelling. The rich psychology of the characters as well. The characters are extremely vivid to me. All of this combined with Baker's masterful prose is the reason why White Luck Warrior stands out to me. It's one of the most brilliant fantasy books I've ever read in one of the richest fantasy worlds I've ever read about. This book and series is not for the faint of heart. It's not going to appeal to a lot of fantasy readers, but it's certainly worked for me. I loved it. It's my number one book of 2024. Need I say more? That is it. Those are my top 10 books of 2024. Now I'd love to hear from you in the comment section below your thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned, any surprises on my list. Please let me know. Please let me know your favorite book of 2024, as I would love to hear what it is. And thank you so much for watching. Have a great rest of your year, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.